The scorching African sun beat down mercilessly on Sergeant Mike Cranston's neck as he knelt in the golden grass of Kenya's Tsavo National Park. 6 months into his deployment with the U.S. Army's Specialized Anti-Poaching Unit, he'd seen his share of wildlife encounters. But nothing had prepared him for this. Less than 10 feet away stood a massive male lion, its amber eyes fixed directly on him. Not charging, not retreating, just watching him with an intensity that made the hair on his neck stand up despite the sweltering heat. "Don't move," whispered Captain Kimani of the Kenya Wildlife Service through the radio earpiece. "I'm tracking your position. The helicopter is 15 minutes out." Mike remained frozen, his military training kicking in as he assessed his limited options. His tranquilizer gun was holstered. Reaching for it might trigger the predator's chase instinct. His sidearm was a last resort he hoped desperately to avoid. This lion was one of only 20 mature males left in this protected region, each one critical to the species' survival against the devastating impact of poachers. What happened next would later be documented in Mike's official report, though he would revise it 3 times before his commanding officer would accept it. Even then, the file would be flagged for psychological review. The lion, a magnificent specimen with a full dark mane, took 2 deliberate steps toward Mike. Then it did something completely unexpected. It lowered itself to the ground with a groan that sounded almost human, extending its massive right paw toward the soldier. "Ah, Jesus Christ," Mike breathed, instinctively raising his hand to signal a halt, a gesture absurdly inadequate against the king of beasts. But the lion wasn't advancing to attack. As it stretched its paw further, Mike noticed something protruding from the massive pad. Something that didn't belong. A thick black object was deeply embedded in the lion's flesh, with dried blood and inflammation surrounding the wound. "There's something in its paw," Mike reported into his radio, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "It appears to be injured." "Do not approach," Captain Kimani's voice crackled back immediately. "Wait for the veterinary team. That animal is still a wild predator regardless of any injury." The lion's behavior defied everything Mike had learned during his pre-deployment training. Instead of aggression, the animal displayed what could only be described as deliberate communication. It extended its injured paw again, its eyes never leaving Mike's face, then let out a low sound somewhere between a groan and a whimper. Against direct orders and everything he'd been taught about wild animal encounters, Mike made a decision that would later alter the course of his military career and his life. Slowly, deliberately, he removed his helmet and set it on the ground, a gesture of vulnerability that contradicted every survival instinct screaming in his brain. Then he spoke, not through his radio, but directly to the lion in a low, calm voice. "Okay, big guy, I see your problem. Let me think about how to help you." The lion, as if understanding, remained perfectly still, its injured paw still extended toward the soldier. Mike's mind raced through his emergency field medical training. The object appeared to be a poacher's crossbow bolt, likely fired during one of the increasingly brazen nighttime hunting operations his unit had been deployed to combat. The wound was infected, the flesh swollen and discolored. Without treatment, the king of beasts would likely die from blood poisoning within days. "I need to get closer to assess the injury," Mike reported, already knowing the response his words would trigger. "Negative, Sergeant," Captain Kimani's voice was sharp with alarm. "Maintain your position. The animal is compromised and unpredictable." "That's an order." Mike weighed his options. The 15 minutes before help would arrive, the deteriorating condition of the lion's paw, and the strange, almost supernatural connection he felt with the injured predator. Throughout his 12 years of military service, including 2 tours in Afghanistan, Mike had developed an intuition that had saved his life and the lives of his squad members on multiple occasions. That same intuition was now telling him something that defied logical explanation. This lion was deliberately seeking his help. Copy that, Captain, Mike responded, his decision already made. But this lion isn't acting like a predator. It's acting like a patient. Slowly telegraphing each movement, Mike reached into his medical kit and removed a pair of gloves. The lion watched. Its breathing labored but its posture non-threatening. As Mike inched forward on his knees, closing the distance between himself and the 400-pound apex predator, he maintained a steady stream of calm, quiet words. I'm going to help you. But you need to stay just like that. We both want that thing out of your paw. But you can't eat the guy trying to remove it. Deal. The absurdity of negotiating with a wild lion was not lost on Mike. Yet somehow the animal's behavior suggested an understanding that transcended the natural order of predator and prey. It remained motionless as Mike closed the final distance between them. Close enough now to smell the lion's breath and see the individual whiskers framing its massive face. In that moment, kneeling before one of nature's most efficient predators, Mike experienced a clarity of focus he'd only felt in the most intense combat situations. The lion's injured paw lay before him. The crossbow bolt protruded at an angle that suggested it had been fired from a distance, likely while the animal was in motion. The metal tip had penetrated the sensitive pad and appeared to have lodged against bone. I can see the problem, Mike said into his radio, his voice clinical and detached despite the extraordinary circumstances. It's a metal bolt, approximately 8 centimeters exposed. Unknown depth of penetration. The entry wound is infected with significant inflammation and purulent discharge. Sergeant Cranston, Captain Kimani's voice had shifted from commanding to concerned. What is your current proximity to the animal? I'm within arm's reach, sir. The lion is compliant. Even as he said it, Mike recognized how inadequate the description was. How it failed to capture the intelligent awareness in the lion's eyes as it watched him examine its injury. A long pause followed before Captain Kimani responded. The veterinary team has been notified of the situation. Dr. Njeri says if you're confident the animal is remaining non-aggressive, you should apply pressure around the wound to stabilize the object. Do not attempt removal. I repeat, do not attempt removal. Copy that, Mike acknowledged, though his instincts told him the bolt needed to come out immediately. The infection was advancing, and the continued presence of the foreign object was preventing any healing. Maintaining eye contact with the lion, Mike reached slowly into his medical kit and extracted gauze pads and a small bottle of antiseptic. This is going to sting, he warned, feeling slightly ridiculous for explaining medical procedures to a wild animal. Yet something in the lion's steady gaze suggested an understanding that transcended the expected boundaries between species. As Mike gently pressed the gauze around the wound to clean away the infection, the lion flinched but didn't withdraw its paw or show any aggression. A low rumble emanated from its chest. Not quite a growl. More like a groan of pain mixed with what almost sounded like relief. Oh, good boy, Mike found himself saying. The words one might use with a domestic pet slipping out automatically. Just a little more, then we'll let the professionals take over. As he continued to clean around the wound, Mike noticed something that made his blood run cold. Etched into the metal shaft of the bolt was a small symbol. A rhinoceros horn crossed with a dagger. He recognized it immediately from intelligence briefings. The marking of the Niati Syndicate, one of East Africa's most notorious poaching operations. Captain, the bolt has the Niati insignia. These weren't opportunistic poachers. This was a targeted operation. The Niati Syndicate was known for its sophisticated tactics and high-value targets, specializing in rhino horn and elephant ivory. but lion parts had recently gained value in certain black markets for traditional medicines. Understood. Sergeant. Document everything and preserve the bolt when it's removed. This could provide valuable intelligence. As Mike continued treating the wound, his mind pieced together what might have happened. The lion had likely interrupted poachers targeting other animals, perhaps rhinos, that shared this territory. Rather than risk the noise of a gunshot, they'd used a crossbow. Effective, but less precise. The bolt had struck the lion's paw instead of a vital area, allowing the animal to escape but leaving it crippled and unable to hunt effectively. How long have you been suffering like this, big guy? Mike murmured, his respect for the animal's fortitude growing. A wound like this would have meant weeks of pain and hunger. Suddenly, the lion's head jerked up, its attention shifting to something beyond Mike's shoulder. Its muscles tensed, and a low warning growl rumbled from deep in its chest. Mike froze, not daring to turn around. Had the helicopter arrived? Was another predator approaching? Or worse, had the poachers returned to finish what they'd started? Captain, something's happening. The lion's behavior has changed. Maintain your position. Sergeant, the helicopter is 3 minutes out. What specifically are you observing? Before Mike could respond, he heard it, the soft crunch of grass under a boot behind him. The lion's growl intensified, but remarkably it didn't flee or charge. Instead, it seemed to position itself slightly forward, as if placing itself between Mike and whatever approached. U.S. military. Identify yourself. Mike called out sharply, his hand moving instinctively toward his sidearm despite the awkward position he was in. Still kneeling beside the lion. Easy, soldier, came a female voice with an American accent. Dr. Leah Nolan, wildlife veterinarian. I was doing field research nearby when I picked up the radio chatter. Moving with deliberate slowness, Mike turned his head enough to see a woman in khaki field clothes approaching. Medical pack in hand, the lion continued to growl softly but remained in place. How did you get here so fast? Mike asked, maintaining his position to avoid startling the lion. I was tracking a pregnant lioness less than 2 kilometers from here. Your situation sounded unique. She stopped a respectful distance away, her experienced eyes assessing both Mike and the lion. And it appears the radio chatter didn't fully capture just how unique. He's actually letting you treat him. Seems that way, Mike confirmed, still not entirely believing it himself. He approached me, showed me the injury. It's a poacher's bolt. Niati syndicate marking. Dr. Nolan's expression darkened. They've been increasingly active in this sector. 2 rhinos were found dead last week. Horns removed. She studied the lion with newfound interest. This big boy might have interrupted their operation. That was my thought as well, Mike agreed. The bolt needs to come out and the wound needs proper treatment. I've just been stabilizing until the KWS veterinary team arrives. With your permission, Sergeant, I can do more than stabilize. I have a full field surgery kit with me, including antibiotics and pain management. This is my specialty. Mike relayed the information to Captain Kimani, who quickly authorized Dr. Nolan to take over treatment once her credentials were verified over the radio. What followed was a careful choreography as Dr. Nolan slowly approached, narrating her movements to both Mike and the lion in a calm, steady voice. I'm going to administer a local anesthetic first, she explained, preparing a syringe. It won't sedate him completely, but it should dull the pain enough for extraction. I'm amazed he's allowing this level of handling. The lion flinched slightly when the needle entered the inflamed tissue around the wound but otherwise remained remarkably still, as if understanding that this momentary discomfort was necessary for relief. Dr. Nolan worked with practiced efficiency, her movements precise and confident despite the extraordinary circumstances. "I've never seen anything like this in 20 years of wildlife medicine," she murmured, preparing her extraction tools while waiting for the anesthetic to take effect. Lions are highly intelligent, but this level of trust with humans is unprecedented in a wild specimen. Mike maintained his position, speaking softly to the lion as Dr. Nolan worked. "You got the best doc in Kenya working on you now, big guy. You'll be hunting again in no time." "The bolt is embedded deeper than I initially thought," Dr. Nolan observed after probing the wound. "It's against the metacarpal bone but hasn't penetrated it, thankfully. I'm going to need steady hands for this extraction." For 15 tense minutes, Mike and Dr. Nolan worked in silent coordination, she focusing entirely on the delicate extraction while he monitored the lion's responses and kept it calm with his presence and voice. When the metal bolt finally slid free, Dr. Nolan held it up briefly before placing it in a sterile evidence bag. "We'll want to run tests on this," she said. "There could be DNA evidence from the poachers. And we need to check for any toxic substances. Some operations have begun using poisoned weapons to ensure their targets don't survive. Even if they escape." The wound began bleeding freely once the bolt was removed, and Dr. Nolan quickly applied antiseptic and pressure. "I need to flush this thoroughly and get antibiotics on board. He's going to need follow-up treatment, but at least now he has a chance." As if understanding her words, the lion turned its massive head toward the veterinarian, its amber eyes studying her with the same intense focus it had directed at Mike earlier. "I think he's thanking you," Mike said, surprised by the emotion in his own voice. Dr. Nolan smiled slightly without looking up from her work. "I think he's wondering if I'm going to hurt him more or help him. Animals live in the moment, Sergeant. They don't have our concepts of gratitude." Yet something in the lion's demeanor suggested otherwise to Mike. There was an awareness in those eyes that went beyond instinct or conditioning. When Dr. Nolan administered an injectable antibiotic and painkiller, the lion accepted the second needle without resistance, its gaze never leaving Mike's face. The distant thrum of helicopter rotors announced the arrival of the Kenya Wildlife Service team. And Kamani's voice crackled over the radio. "Veterinary unit is inbound with tranquilizer capability. What's your status, Sergeant Cranston?" "Dr. Nolan has successfully removed the bolt and treated the wound," Mike reported. "The lion remains calm and non-aggressive." "Remarkable," came the captain's reply. "Dr. Njeri wants to know if sedation is still advised for full examination and tracking collar placement." Dr. Nolan considered this as she finished bandaging the paw. "Given his extraordinary behavior, I'd prefer to avoid sedation if possible. It carries risks, especially for an animal already compromised by infection and likely dehydration. If he continues to remain calm, we can attempt the collar placement without chemical intervention." As the helicopter landed in a clearing 200 meters away, the lion's muscles tensed. It rose partially from its resting position, eyes fixed on the aircraft. "Easy," Mike soothed, instinctively placing a hand on the lion's shoulder, a gesture that would have been suicidal under normal circumstances. "They're here to help you, too." Remarkably, the lion settled back down, though its eyes remained wearily fixed on the approaching team. Dr. Njeri, the KWS senior veterinarian, slowed his pace as he neared, his expression a mixture of disbelief and professional curiosity. "In 30 years of wildlife medicine, I have never witnessed such a scene," he said quietly to Dr. Nolan. "Your radio description didn't do it justice." Working together, the veterinary team completed a full field examination of the lion, documenting its condition with photographs and measurements. They estimated it to be approximately 8 years old, prime age for a male, and, despite the paw injury, in otherwise good health. A GPS tracking collar was fitted while Mike continued to keep the lion calm with his presence and voice. "We'll name him Askari," Dr. and Jerry decided, entering the designation into his tablet. "It means soldier in Swahili. It seems appropriate given the circumstances." When the examination was complete, the team backed away to a safe distance, leaving only Mike and Dr. Nolan with the lion. The question hanging in the air was obvious. What now? Would the lion simply walk away? Would it require encouragement to return to the wild? "The medication will make him drowsy," Dr. Nolan explained, packing her equipment. "He should rest here for a while before moving. The tracking collar will allow us to monitor his recovery and movement patterns." Mike nodded, reluctant to break the connection that had formed but knowing it was necessary. This was a wild animal. Regardless of its unusual behavior, it belonged in the savannah, not in human company. "Time for me to go. Askari," he said softly. "You take care of that paw." As if understanding, the lion blinked slowly, a gesture that in feline behavior often signifies trust and contentment. Then, to the astonishment of everyone present, it extended its uninjured paw and placed it briefly on Mike's knee before withdrawing it and settling into a resting position in the grass. The gesture left Mike completely lost for words. 6 months later, Sergeant Mike Cranston stood on the observation platform at the eastern boundary of Tsavo National Park, binoculars trained on a pride of lions resting in the shade of an acacia tree. Among them was a large male with a distinctive dark mane, identifiable by the GPS collar still around its neck. "Askari has fully integrated with the pride," Dr. Nolan explained, checking the tracking data on her tablet. "His hunting success rate returned to normal within weeks of treatment, and the pride has successfully defended its territory against 2 challenger males since then." "And the poachers?" Mike asked, not lowering his binoculars. "The evidence from the bolt was instrumental in tracking down the Niati operation," she confirmed. KWS and Interpol conducted raids on 3 locations based on DNA and materials analysis. 6 arrests so far, with more pending. "Your encounter with Askari may have done more for conservation than a year of regular patrols." Mike nodded, watching as the lion rose and stretched in the distance, its movements powerful and fluid, no sign remaining of the injury that had brought them together. The official report of the incident had been carefully worded, emphasizing the unique circumstances and medical necessity while downplaying the more inexplicable aspects of the encounter. Yet everyone who had witnessed it knew they had experienced something that defied conventional understanding of wildlife behavior. "My deployment ends next month," Mike said, finally lowering the binoculars. "I've been thinking about what comes next." Dr. Nolan glanced at him with interest. "Any decisions?" "I've applied to the International Anti-Poaching Foundation's Ranger Training Program. They're looking for people with military background to help train local conservation teams." She smiled. "Inspired by a certain 4-legged patient?" "Something like that," Mike acknowledged. "That day changed my perspective. I came to Africa thinking I was protecting wildlife as part of a broader mission. But now I understand it's more than that. These animals aren't just resources to be preserved. They're individuals with intelligence and awareness we're only beginning to comprehend." As if hearing his words across the distance, Askari raised his massive head and looked directly toward the observation platform. The radio tracker confirmed it was the same lion, now fully recovered and thriving in his natural environment. In that moment, despite all rational explanation to the contrary, Mike felt the same connection he had experienced months earlier, a recognition between species that transcended conventional understanding. The lion that had once asked a soldier for help was now helping others in return. His story became an inspiration for conservation efforts and a reminder that the boundaries between Humans and wildlife were perhaps more permeable than science had previously recognized. And somewhere in the savannah, poachers thought twice before entering the territory marked by the tracks of a lion named Askari, a guardian of the wild who had, through one remarkable encounter, formed an alliance that would protect his kingdom for years to come.